my working across party lines, I only mention in reference to the fact that I know I was helped because I put together packages on the science and gave them and spent time talking to each Okanagan area member of parliament, of whom only one is NDP and all the rest are Conservative. And I asked them, I said, you know, you can tell I want to keep it open in my riding, it's jobs in my riding, but honestly, as a policy decision, I don't think you want this in the Okanagan. So that was, there was a lot of, I had a lot of help on that, and I'm very grateful for that. The other, and of course, lots of work in the community on immigration issues and EI, wait times, and CRA, and all the usual horrors of dealing with bureaucracy. The work in Ottawa was primarily around the second budget omnibus bill. You'll remember from previous discussions, and of course from the media, that in the spring we had Bill C-38, which was over 400 pages, changing 70 different laws, purported to be required by Budget 2012, which the budget implementation bills, by the way, don't implement the budget. The budget was already implemented. These omnibus bills were on, in addition to the budget, so it wasn't as if we were holding up government spending. C-38 omnibus bill was devastating to many laws. C-45 wasn't quite as devastating, and as I've said, it was basically because there are only so many environmental laws to destroy. By the time C-38 got rid of the Environmental Assessment Act, changed the Fisheries Act, made significant changes to the National Energy Board and a number of other agencies, killed the National Roundtable and so on. C-45 had a couple of, well, it was also over 400 pages long. The most devastating parts of it dealt with the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and it decided that instead of what, believe it or not, this act goes back to Sir John A. Macdonald. So under Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, Canadians had a right to navigate any body of water in which they could get a canoe or a kayak. If you could get it through that water, we each have a right to navigate any body of water that's navigable. And the old definition from 1883 was, if you can get a canoe down it, it's navigable. I didn't quite say canoe, but a vessel, and that included a canoe. By 2009 was the first attack on the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and they changed it. Stephen Harper, in minority, used the omnibus budget procedure, because if you were to, in minority, defeating a budget bill could prompt an election. So that kept the opposition parties from making too much of a fuss. And that was a smaller change to the Navigable Waters Act. It said, a navigable water is no longer an objective definition. You can get a boat down it. And it became, navigable waters are navigable if the Minister of Transportation says they are. Then, in C-38, they changed the Navigable Water Protection Act to say, and of course when you're navigating and you have a right to navigate, what are you worried about? Obstructions. So the way this act has always worked is the Minister of Transportation federally must give a permit for any obstruction to a navigable water. So in C-38, in the spring, they changed the definitions under the Act to say that a pipeline is specifically not an obstruction. A pipeline is not covered by the Navigable Waters Protection Act. So, you know, if you'd asked me midsummer, are they done with the Navigable Waters Protection Act, I would have thought so. They said it's navigable if the minister says it is, and pipelines don't count as obstructions. But apparently there's other things that they were worried about. So now, as you may have heard, C-45 says it is a navigable water in Canada if you can find it in Schedule A of the Act. And then in a country that has millions of lakes, they listed 97 lakes. And in a country with tens of thousands of rivers, they listed 65 rivers. And if it's not on the list, it's not navigable. So I put, and then there were other sections of C-45 that concern me. One, I'm afraid, will really have a negative impact on tourism. They've created essentially an electronic form for permission to come to Canada as tourists. So yes, we've had concerns for immigration changes and refugee changes and so on. This is essentially tying into the U.S. for a no-fly list, and anybody coming from any country that requires, but rather put it the other way around, countries that don't require a visa to come to Canada, so European Union, New Zealand, Australia, much of the world, as of, before C-45, you could just, call your travel agent, book a ticket, and have a vacation in Canada. Now you have to go online, fill out a form, and find out if Jason Kenney says you can take your vacation in Canada. Except if you're from the US, in which case you can come because it's part of the North American security perimeter. So it's also for those who are paying attention to issues of integration politically and economically with the US. This is part of that deeper integration, that there's a perimeter around Canada and the US, but any other country, people who come to Canada, and again, this is for vacations. This is no intention of staying in the country. You will need a new permit. So I tried to change that. Anyway, so I won't go on too much about C-45, but it did, despite my efforts with a lot of amendments, it did pass. The other thing I spent a lot of time on through the fall was the Canada-China Investment Treaty. I sometimes have a kind of a, well, of course, it's just past Christmas, so we were all watching It's a Wonderful Life. So I sometimes think, if I hadn't been born and I wasn't in Parliament, would anyone have noticed the Canada-China Investment Treaty? Because I was the first one to notice it, and I was the first one to mention it, and it wasn't intended to be put forward for debate or a vote, and it wasn't put forward for debate or a vote. It can be ratified at any time by what's called order in council, which means as the result of a cabinet meeting. And I have to say I'm very relieved that even though they could have ratified it as early as November 2nd, as of today, it's not yet ratified, and I'm continuing to work to try to stop it from being ratified because it would lock Canada in to an agreement that would allow state-owned enterprises of China to sue us if they didn't like any change in our laws, either municipally, provincially, or federally, and we really couldn't get out of it for up to 31 years. My high point of the last number of months since I last held a session here, I'm sure I got some congratulations from people coming in the door. I'm sure a lot of people would think my high point must be that my fellow members of Parliament, across party lines, okay, I will say that, I'm pretty chuffed, elected me Parliamentarian of the Year.